I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I'm not formally trained in HR or recruitment. I'm not a trainer or a consultant. But what I do offer is I've got 20 plus years of recruitment experience in the NHS. I must have reviewed over 500 job applications. I must have interviewed at least 100 candidates. So I just want to share my experiences. So I've kind of prepared my slides on the basis that the interviews are going to be held kind of remotely, but we can also have a discussion around how we would address face-to-face interview scenarios if anyone has questions on that. But before we start, I just want to say, if you've been shortlisted for an interview, obviously you're in the roles here, you will have done, but if you've been shortlisted for an interview recently, well, congratulations. It just means that the recruiting manager was impressed with your application and has the confidence you can deliver on the role. I think we're just now trying to understand whether you'll be a good fit for the team, and whether just explore a bit more about your achievements. So do you want to move to the next slide, please, Antonio, on slide 2 agenda. So you'll see that the agenda is quite brief. I'm hoping we can get through it in the next hour, so we'll give more time to Q&A, and that's why I'm talking a bit fast. And hopefully you'll find some hints and tips that you might find useful in there. And the contents of the slides are not particularly exhaustive. There's lots out there. People can do their own research. So as I'm navigating through the slides, if you feel that I'm kind of missing something obvious, please interject or drop a note in the chat and we'll have a conversation about that. And hopefully we'll get that. We'll try to do a quick break for just 5 minutes if I can get up to speed with all the lack of time that we've had. But can I just, just a show of hands, how many people have actually have sat on interview panels themselves on the interviewing side? Okay, that's good. So you've got experience from both sides. Brilliant, fantastic. So the agenda is we're going to sort of break up on this. You've got the things we need to do in terms of preparation before the interview. In terms of what we need to include in terms of the discussion of the interview, what we need to consider after, and there's some suggested topics from colleagues and some useful links at the end. So that's really a brief agenda. So if you want to move to the next slide, please, appreciate it. So this slide, I'm just going to do a quick recap for those people who were not at the session last time, but there is, as Antonio mentioned, the slide set, you'll have got those. There's also a recording from that if you want to avail yourself to that as well. Please do that. But I'll do a quick recap. But just firstly, from my own personal experiences in shortlisting, I've kind of found that, the quality of job application has been often quite poor. Probably 80% of them don't quite hit the mark because we're not really particularly good at marketing ourselves. We do not tailor our applications or answer the questions that are asked or provide evidence, which is what they want to see, the evidence based on the person spec. So what I'm trying to say is we've got a really good opportunity to write a really impactful job application, and hopefully that will impress the recruiting manager. And these simple hints and tips hopefully will give colleagues a competitive edge over the applicants. So what I'm trying to say is, start listing. This is one of the most crucial things we need to do. We do some magical things in our working environment, but we don't recognize as magically significant things because they're part of our routine work. But start listing your achievements and successes at least on a weekly basis. So you've got a lot of content there that a bag of tricks you can reach into. So when you're providing evidence in applications, you can start to reach into that and add those in and provide that as evidence rather than trying to get fumbled in terms of filling in the application and interviews. Because the advertised vacancy might be a narrow time frame, so we need to get ahead of the game regarding that. And this will help you identify your unique selling point. Whatever that happens to be, you may already be working in the team, or you might have undertaken a high level secondment, or you might have done some advanced training or qualifications, or have technical capabilities. So think about what distinguishes you from other applicants. So that will be your unique selling point. And you can frame your USPs against, the agenda. I won't go through the details, but there are in the job evaluation handbook. for agenda of change. There are 16 factors, so you can probably map them against those. So it'll give a nice, neat structure. So when you need to dip into your bag of tricks or that library, you've got all the evidence against those areas. We also spoke about the CAR and STAR model. I use the term interchangeably. For those people who don't know, CAR model is challenge, action, result. What challenge you were faced with, what action you took, and what was the result. And the STAR model is what situation you were faced with, what was a task that you needed to undertake, what action you took, and what was the result from that. So when you use that model, that framework, to give you specific, it will help you give specific examples rather than to give general answers to both the application and the interview. So what I would suggest you do is start listing your achievements in your personal record using the STAR and CAR model. So what that does, it gives you a framework in which you can then elaborate both at the application stage and indeed at the interview. I've also said, and I feel this is quite important, that do speak to the recruiting manager before you submit your application. And if you can get a Teams call set up with them, by all means do that, because by asking them questions to learn more about the role on offer, you'll glean a lot out of them, and also you can gauge their personality in a kind of an informal setting to see if you can build a rapport with them or if you can work with them. Now, the job application slide deck that you'll have received, there are some questions in there that you can consider some of those questions. When I had the conversation with the recruiting manager, I've thrown them at them and learned more about the role and the individual and the aspects of the role and the culture and the environment, that kind of stuff. I found it incredibly helpful. And when I've had a subsequent interview, I weaved in the conversation that we've had into the interview and indeed the presentation. So please avail yourself to the discussion with the recruiting manager, because that again will give you that competitive edge. You'll get that additional bit of information that you can then weave in into the application and the interviews. So I think that will really help, because not everybody calls up. In terms of the job application form itself, absolutely it needs to state facts about your achievements, your successes, the roles and responsibilities, the thing you've delivered. But what you should also try to include in there is more about your personality. What appeals to you about the role and the employer? Why do you want to do the job? Why are you passionate about working in the NHS? What drives you? What's your determination? And talk about your values and behaviours and how they relate to the NHS values and behaviours. Things like having patients at the forefront of decisions, making sure everybody counts, and making sure you're the champion for treating everybody with respect and dignity. And what you think you can offer the team and help you deliver and progress in the role for which you're interested in. We also spoke about structuring the supporting information section in the applications in the same order as the person spec, so the reader can follow it easily, so you've got a complete read across. So I would say start off by saying, why do you want to work for the employer? Have a subheading and write a little bit underneath there, and what another heading, so what appeals to you about the role, and underneath I'd say, right, for each person spec criterion, if it's broad, I read across that and say, here's my evidence. For instance, some say you need to demonstrate strong communication skills. Give an example where you've done that, rather than make broad statements. I'm a strong communicator. They want to know how you've applied your communication skills to deliver an outcome. Things like that is really helpful. We need to do it on that basis. So you imagine them getting 50, 60 applications in. So instead of them looking for the evidence, it's directly there in front of them, and they do a complete read across. It's really easy for them to then shortlist. So the next bit around checking the grammar and spelling, absolutely, that's critical. Do review it several times before you submit it. Have a family member or a friend, particularly somebody who's unfamiliar with the subject, ask them to read it to see whether they understand the message that you're trying to convey. Be careful about acronyms that other people are unfamiliar with. And how you write this application will be an indication of how you would write a report for that team, or how you would present a business proposal to senior managers. So it's really important that you keep it direct, concise, relevant, and free for grammatical and spelling errors. So definitely. So these are some hints and tips in the application slide deck. Do take time to read into that, and if you get a chance to do have a quick view of the YouTube video that can be shared by Antonio if you've not done already. So I'm going to stop there on that slide before we move into the main bit of the discussion on interviews. I know some chats are coming through, but is anything that people want to just touch upon in this after this slide? I don't know, Antonio, whether you've got anything from that.
No question. Someone just said that they were shortlisting applicants for a post a couple of years ago, and the accompanying personal statement was the following: inspiration, perspiration, illustration, and something similar, as they had no qualifications or experience relevant to the role which they were being shortlisted for. We didn't shortlist them, she said.
Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't a question, it's just a comment.
Well, I've had somebody in the, I'm sorry to say this, but in the supporting information, it needs to be evidence-based against each criterion in the person spec, because that's what they're looking for. I've had somebody in the supporting information said, well, my friend Hannah works in the NHS, and she said it's a great place to work, that's why I'm applying. So you get people like that, unfortunately, and sometimes it's easy to distinguish between the strong and poor applicants. So you just go with the best applicants. So it happens. So the rotor's got a hand up.
I've got two people. So first person was Barbara. Go ahead, Barbara. Can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Hi. I was just wondering, what's the position for people with like severe dyslexia or with English as a second language using AI to support them with writing this stuff? Because AI can do it really well and it can help you structure it. But how do we help people whose English isn't as good to level the playing field? Because if you just rely on AI, it's very obvious. But that's only very obvious if you speak good English. It's not very obvious if English is your second language. And it's not a level playing field for people with neurodiversities and people with English difficulties, or people who don't speak a second language, because we're always, that's what I was saying, Sherry, we're always being assessed on your spelling, your grammar, blah, 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 blah. And that's not fair, because it's excluding a massive portion of the population who don't have good education. And while this kind of training is brilliant to teach people that you will be assessed on the STAR model, use it in your application and use it in your interview, it doesn't help with that kind of barrier that is embedded in everything with, throughout the nation, but especially, in interviews, it's a massive barrier for a load of people. And I see applications, myself sometimes, and the language isn't good, and I have to kind of keep trying to rewrite it in my head, imagining that this person is probably not speaking English as a first language, and turning it around. But not everyone does that. So what is your advice on that, and especially around AI?
That's a really, really important point that made. I'm not professing to be an expert on this. I fully sympathise for those people who are struggling with these kind of issues. So I'm again talking about from my own experiences. So when I've shortlisted, I guess from my perspective, I would probably think I need to be a bit more sensitive. So if I've come across applications that's riddled with spelling mistakes, I shouldn't personally think, well, actually, this person's lazy and they're not competent and they've not proofread it, or they're not anybody else to proofread it. But I personally think I need to be a bit more sensitive around, given what you just said. Now, what I would ask is, we talked about AI. Now, we spoke about AI at the last session. Whilst they can give you a lot of general information around that, and then clearly, if you lift and shift it into the document, it's clear that that's been taken from AI, and you don't get an opportunity to tailor it. So what I would do, if people are struggling, by all means reach out to whatever tools are out there. It's not illegal. You're gathering evidence. So whilst you can get sort of key principles and themes, what we'll need to do is sort of tailor the application once you've got the content, the structure there, and tailor it for your own needs. Now, I would ask people if they without them feeling uncomfortable about this, that if they're prepared to have somebody, work colleague or a family member to read it through and kind of sanitize it to help it. And I can't obviously trying to get into the individual's head. So what is the message that they're trying to convey? So I can't, like I said, I'm not an expert in this, and I may have not shortlisted people based on the poor spelling in the past, but that's a lesson for me as well. So sorry, it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but I have a lot of sympathies.
Thank you for being honest there, and maybe that's something, if you're ever doing training for people who are shortlisting, to think about language and neurodiversity and sentence construction, because that's where again people can struggle. And I'll probably come back in when we get to interviews, but I'll stop talking for now.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Dorothy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So my question was, it's in relation to when you mentioned why and what appeals to you in relation to the post. Now, when we're looking at applications, a lot of it is set on essential and desirable criteria, and that's how the scoring works. So as an example, if somebody wrote like 2 paragraphs in relation to that, there's potential there that they may not actually be scored for that, those 2 paragraphs. But are we saying that potentially recruiters in their essential or desirable criteria should make more of that? Because in what I've seen in NHS job adverts, NHS England job adverts, that doesn't shine through, or it's not very clear. It is very, specific in terms of what the essential and desirable criteria are. So I'm just thinking, we're trying to score as high as we can, but then if we're putting sort of like 2 paragraphs into why it appeals to you, we might be losing points because of that, because it's not in the essential criteria.
Yeah, absolutely legitimate point you've made. But what I was trying to say about that is you can always summarize that, why you feel you meet the criteria in a summarized version, and then you go into the detail, individual specific. If there's room to do that, by all means. But if you're running out of space, we've got a limit of 1,500 words, and it's amazing how much you fill. But if there's capacity to do that, definitely. And again, this is what I would do. I'm not suggesting that everybody does that. Absolutely, keep it in. Absolutely, we talked about Karen. We talked about keep it short and direct and concise, because how we write this will determine how we write our reports, and they'll understand it on that basis. Yeah, I totally agree, Dorota. Yeah, absolutely. If you feel there's no room in the application form, keep it focused on the essential and desirable criteria. If there's room, absolutely. So what's your passion about that? Why do you want to do that? Absolutely. And somebody mentioned earlier, Karen mentioned, is it worth the individual stating at the start of the job application that they're neurodivergent? I think that's a fantastic suggestion. Honestly, you're just going to get back with that. Hopefully, you get on a level playing field and people are a bit more sensitive for that. And if I was on the shortlisting panel, I'd be just bit more delicate in terms of my shortlist on that basis. So yeah, personally, I'm 100% for that suggestion.
Thanks, Zai. I've got a question in the Q&A. Do you still apply for a role if you don't have all the essential requirements? Would you advise them to apply?
So my view is that if you genuinely think that you've got you might not have had exposure to those specific roles and responsibilities. If you don't meet any of the criteria, then it's difficult. You might be moving from one kind of role to a completely radically different role. I understand that's always going to be a challenge, but as the saying goes, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If you feel you've got the potential, and what I would start doing now, if you want to move from your current kind of profession to a slightly different one, and there are gaps in there, and we spoke about at the last session about this, trying to see whether you can do a secondment somewhere, do an additional training, and pick up work on a different project that you can help you plug those gaps. Definitely do that. But if you feel actually I meet some of the essential criteria, but not all of it, you don't know what competition you're going to be facing, and who knows that the recruiting managers think, actually, I like this person's application. They don't meet every criteria on here, but they meet a reasonable amount or half of it, which is good, because I wouldn't want to recruit somebody who knows absolutely everything, because that what motivate them in a year's or 6 months time. They might leave thinking I've achieved what I needed to. So I want to get somebody who can grow and develop in the role and help influence and shape it. So if you genuinely feel there's potential for you, do put the application. There's no harm in doing that. And at the very least, this will be a learning experience. If you go through an application and go through an interview, and it just gives you that bit of extra experience in that. So when you do apply for a role that you think, actually, that's definitely earmarked for me, and I've got the experience for the application and interviews, I can then have that level of confidence. I've had that exposure.
Thank you, Zahir. Helen, we're going to take one more question and move on because I'm just mindful of the time. Are you happy to take 3 questions, Zahir, for this particular slide?
If anyone's got anything pressing, we can. If they haven't, we can move on.
Go ahead, Helen.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. So I have just been Teams messaging a colleague. There is a new recruitment policy out there. They are asking line managers, recruiting managers to do the training, and the new policy does cover candidates with neurodiverse, with dyslexia, with all the disabilities. So it's just a plea. If you are a recruiting manager, look out for the new policies that are on the hub and go to the workshops, because it has been released. I think it was released in June and July time. But even if you are just applying for roles, then the guidance is there on the hub at NHS England, and go and have a look so you know what those recruiting managers are looking for and scoring for in your applications.
Thank you very much, Helen. Is there something you can share in the chat, please? If you share the link with the colleagues in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful to know. Appreciate that.
Arthur, you have your hand up. Could you ask your question? Please make it brief. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just quickly, because it's something I've observed in the last 4 or 5 interviews I have attended with the NHS. I'm from NHS Scotland. So I noticed that most of the roles are often, should I say, reserved for internal candidates. Like the organization already have a candidate for this role, but it's still put it out open for other people to apply. And in the long run, after being shortlisted for the interview, and maybe I wasn't successful at the interview, and I got to ask for a feedback, and many times I really always get that there was internal candidates for that position. Why have a position opened when internal candidate was already earmarked for the role?
Yeah, my sympathies. I've heard these stories as well, that I think because HR rules state that it has to go to advert rather than being allocated to an individual, it may well be that somebody who's already kind of provisionally doing some of that role and they've already got somebody earmarked for it, but for the sake of kind of a degree of transparency, they'll put it to advert. But again, they've got somebody earmarked, and that's not to say it'll happen in every instance. You might just have to get somebody who's an excellent candidate who's outside the team that has got a lot of potential to grow and develop and do that and help grow that role. And there have been instances where that role's been given to the other person, even though it's been earmarked for an individual. Yeah, it's not fair. I fully sympathise with that, and I'd be really annoyed if that happened to me. And I think that speaks volumes about some of the behaviours with some of the line managers when they do. It's kind of underhand kind of work behaviour. Yeah, I agree. Jane, I agree with that, absolutely. And then you can decide whether you want to apply for it or not.
Thank you very much. Okay, do you want me to move to the next slide?
Yes, please. I'm just conscious of the time, so let's move on. So again, so in terms of preparing for interviews, so like I said before, if you've been shortlisted, fantastic, pat yourselves on the back. The competition's really tough out there. You might have competed against probably 50 applications, and they'll probably shortlist about 6 or 7. So that's remarkable, and so it can be unnerving. I understand that, right? But as I said, sitting an exam or a driving test or delivering a presentation, attending interviews, they all may seem scary, but they're only hard if we're not prepared for them. Even things like I was telling Antonio, wedding ceremonies, rehearsals are done time and again. Music gigs, stand-up comedy, it's all about rehearsal and practice. So it's trying to get into the habit of all that. And we'll talk about it later, about anticipating the questions at interviews and preparing for them. And, unfortunately, interviews, there are kind of the artificial environments, but we all kind of have to experience them, which is why I suggest contact the recruiting manager. You have an informal conversation, you get an idea of what the environment's going to be like, and you hopefully build a rapport with them. But if we plan and prepare quite well, I think personally, I've had my own experiences with this. We can really enjoy the experience of the interview, and I'm not being facetious here. And it's a real opportunity for us to bring out our personality, because they know from the application whether you got the capabilities of doing the job. Otherwise, they wouldn't have shortlisted you. So hopefully, take some comfort from that. And so the interview may last about an hour. And preparing for it might take several hours. Particularly if you have to do a presentation, you have to constantly rehearse and stand in front of a mirror and talk. We're talking about earlier in the chat as well. So that itself will give us a huge confidence boost, because firstly, we'll get more and more familiar with the topics and the things we're going to talk about. It'll get our creative juices flowing in the interview, and we can start talking about the things we want to without getting too timid and narrow thinking as well, and without worrying. So if you've been shortlisted, it's fantastic. And now it's now essentially for you to validate your understanding of the role and to assess whether you're an ideal fit for the team, but also for the line manager. But it's also for you to assess whether you want to work with that team too. It's a two-way street. There's been times when thankfully, on a rare occasion, where I've had an interview and I felt I've not built a relationship with this person. I don't want to work with that person. I've rejected offers for roles on that basis in the past. So also do avail yourself to some wider reading about, either the employer's publications or the team's strategies or policies, any reports, board papers, to show you you don't have to read word for word, but just get general themes from that to demonstrate you've done your research, and then you can weave in some of into the answers into the interview. Now, the long-term workforce plan is about 150 pages. I'm not envisaging people to just get the key themes from the exec summary. You can probably just get some key themes from that and talk about it at the interview, so give them the confidence that you're familiar with the area of work. And also say, do highlight, because there'll be a lot of stuff in the person spec, job descriptions, the job advert. Just highlight the key kind of roles and responsibilities and key requirements. And then you will have in your list of achievements and successes, remember we said earlier about start documenting those achievements. That will be your unique selling point. And then you can cross-reference those against the roles and responsibilities, the person spec, and say, here's my evidence. So start documenting all those. And you can potentially anticipate many, many interview questions, because the similar questions are asked in similar ways. They're likely to be scenario-based ones, competency-based ones. And if you've got your CAR or STAR model examples ready, you can just dip into those and accentuate and promote those at the interview. And so start planning your responses from your job application, so you've got all the content there in the application, and start thinking about how you can then elaborate on those, your achievements. You might have saved time, saved money, improved accuracy, improved quality, reputation, improved services, patient care. And so there are some examples of potential interview questions, slide 7. It'll be interesting when we get there if people recognize those or they think that's radically different. But what I would suggest, because we've got people on the call, mostly from program and project management, but there are people on the call who've from slightly different roles. So I would suggest do research on interview questions for your respective professions, and then prepare your model answers based on that basis. And you become more and more familiar, and that will give you that level of confidence. But again, I keep saying to people, always give specific examples rather than general statements, and they're looking for evidence on that basis. So think about all the wonderful things you've done. I keep saying keep all the wonderful things you've done, and keep short, concise, direct evidence. Again, I said, look, you'll have spoken with the recruiting manager, and the questions these are in slide 8, some questions that you're going to propose to them as well. And so if you feel there are any other additional ones, by all means, they might come out of the discussions in the interview. Make a quick note of them and touch at the end of when you get a chance to ask questions yourself, do raise those questions with them. Now, there's a lady called Kath Baxter. She used to be an actress, but she's a professional voice coach now. And she has some amazing advice on how we can project our voice when we're talking, when we're delivering presentations, or when we're sitting in interviews. I'm talking fast now because I'm running out of time, but she said, what we need to do is pause just a little bit to just give a moment for us to start formulating our answers. And instead of umming and ahhing and erring, we need to just pause a moment, and then that gives us a moment to start formulate our thinking and respond on that basis. I mean, and how you project yourself at interview is kind of an indication of how you're going to deliver a presentation in the role as well. And there's a link to Kath Baxter's advice at the back end of the slide deck as well. So we'll touch base on that. And also in the last slide is a link on breathing techniques. Slow and deep inhale from the nose and slow release from the mouth. And I did this. I didn't do it today because with all the fluster that I've had with this late joining of the session, but in the previous session I ran, all it does, it makes the person more relaxed, more composed. Dopamine levels are lowered. It has a calming effect on. It's brilliant. I'm being interviewed potentially by 80 people on the call now, so it's absolutely remarkable. It works like magic, and I've never done it before, and so it's really good. By all means, avail to try that technique. It's wonderful. I would also suggest to colleagues that please get into a habit of holding practice interviews with friends, colleagues, family members, and take learning from the feedback as well. And that will give you that level of confidence. I've been there've been times I've spoken to people who've not had interviews in 6 or 7 years, and they're really, really worried. I said, well, all it is practice. Similarly, about presentations, when you move to band 7 and above, the expectation is that you might end up doing a 5 or 10 minute presentation. The key words are rehearse. You need to know the subject, and this is an entirely different subject, separate topic altogether. So, but usual stuff: introduce yourself, talk about the purpose of the presentation. Thank you for that, Ravi. Explain what the challenge is. What are your suggestions? What's your course of action? How do you see improvements being made? And think about evaluation techniques, and think about summarizing and concluding, and also what benefits it's going to bring. And in this environment, you're talking about benefits management as well, understanding that as well. And thank the listener at the end. There'll be Q&As, no doubt, at the end. So I'm going to just pause there, just very quickly. If I can please ask people to keep the questions brief, and hopefully we'll get back on track as soon as I can.
Yeah, thanks, Zahir. I've got a question. Someone's asking, essential criteria. Is that based on the track advert or the detail within the person's spec and assignment brief, or is it all three, as it often differs in documentations and easily takes up to 1,500 words?
Yeah, so the job advert itself is a really good indicator of what the demands of the job is going to be. We can't change the person's spec. We can't change the job description. The moment we change a single word on that, it has to go through a gender change a desktop job evaluation exercise that could potentially lead to it being regraded. So we are not allowed to do that. However, the recruiting managers, they can decide how they're going to word the job advert, which will give you a really good indication. Now, when you presented the evidence in the job application, by all means, have a look at the job advert and touch upon that, and use some reference in there. They're asking for, people who've got a really good proven track record of project delivery. Yeah, brilliant, right? I'll put that in. But then if it's not mentioned in the person spec, hopefully that won't put you off because they've specifically mentioned it in the job advert. In the person spec, I'll look for all the evidence. So the person spec is asking for evidence how you meet the criteria to deliver the job description. So I would focus a little bit on the job advert, but primarily on the person spec. But obviously, the job description is very important because you want to know what the demands of the job are. And so person spec, and they're looking for evidence in every instance.
Thanks, Zahir. I've got another question. Someone's asking, what is the reasonable notice period for interview and expectation? So, for example, if a job closes tonight, interviews on the 11th of November, when should they have shortlisted by to give prep time to prep for the interview?
You know, I think HR rule says that you need to give at least a week's notice, 1 full week, not a working week, but 1 full week. So if they don't do that, that's no matter how, if they are taking time shortlisting or they're busy at work and you've not given enough time for being interviewed, I think that's a bit unprofessional in my view. So, and I've had 4 weeks in the past. So they book them interviews well in advance and give plenty of notice and work around that. Clearly, you don't want to leave it too long, but yeah, as a minimum, it needs to be a week. Often it's 2 weeks, but minimum a week.
Thanks, Zahir. I've got Arthur. You still have your hand up. Is it a legacy hand or have you got a question?
No. I've asked my question, but just sorry, just one last one. How do NHS score candidates in terms of their interviews? Because many times I always get a feedback that the successful candidate had about 2 or 3 points higher than mine and the rest of them. So what are the criteria? How do they score candidates in terms of interview outcome?
So we'll talk about some of the criteria for shortlisting, both for the job applications and the scoring criteria for the interviews. If you bear with me, we'll get to that if that's okay, and we'll do that. But yeah, if somebody, if as part of your feedback and they've said, well, a person scored 3 points higher than you, it might be an aggregation of all the panel members and they just have the score down. And some of the questions they ask, they might have greater weighting because they're more important than others questions. So, and they'll do it on that basis. Again, it all has to be evidence-based, it can be fully auditable, and potentially you could submit a subject access requests for your own documents following the interview if you want to do that. So that's all I can say. We'll talk about the criteria and shortlisting and the marking criteria further down.
Awesome. Thanks, Zahir.
Okay.
I don't think there's any other question in the chat.
Brilliant. Okay, so shall we move to the next slide, please?
Sure.
If people are okay, shall we just continue rather than a 5-minute break? Because I'm just conscious of the time. Is that okay? Okay. So slide 5, we've got halfway. Thank you for that. A lot of thumbs up. Thank you. So for obviously you're all in employment, so you've all been through interviews. It's the slide before that, I think. Okay. So I know we've got quite a lot. There's about 3 slides in during the interview. Be prepared to do about 80% of the talking. It's harder to say this. You need to dominate the room. I need to control the tempo of the meeting. That's what I'm saying. You've clearly impressed them with your job application. And you got to remember, they were really impressed with that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have shortlisted you. So I said in the last session, right, in the job applications workshop, make yourself indispensable or at least impossible to ignore. And they may need you as much as you need them. And so clearly, you really impressed them. Not sure if that's the one. Okay, I think someone before
pointed
that.
out, yeah.
It's like someone before that. So, it might be, sorry. So the interviews, again, I'm assuming it's remote interview through Teams. Clearly, make sure there's plenty of lighting, laptops is charged. I'm going to embarrass myself with a couple of things in a minute, but the desk is clear of any clutter, close down all the other applications, and there's no harm at all putting post-it notes around the bevel of your laptop or on your desk. When we present reports at work, we refer to notes and documents. Clearly, we don't want to be reading word for word like that, but you can just put quick bullet points and have them at hand to sort of dip into. Remember the evidence base, the star and car model people were talking about. I get a bit flustered. I'm not sure what I need to say. You've got all the evidence in your job application. You've accentuated that. You've elaborated on those at the interview. That's absolutely fine, Donna. Honestly, it's absolutely fine. And I have no equivocation. If I was interviewing somebody and they've had notes on, I'd be more than happy with that. It's trying to ensuring that they convey the message across. Now, the next one, be ready on online 10 minutes before the interview. That's a learning exercise for me as well. Helen, if people have said that, it's a red flag for me. I wouldn't want to work for that team, because is that to say that when you're presenting a report, are you not allowed to look at documents? It's absolutely fine in my view, and my view is that it's more than acceptable, but it's up to individuals. But have the knowledge in your head about all the things you want to talk about in the applications, and if you've been through the application and all the documents, you'll able to recall it quickly anyway, so absolutely fine. So yeah, be ready on online 10 minutes before the interview and have a telephone number at hand that you can contact in the event that we have technical problems. I spoke about before you start the interview, take a few long, slow breaths as well, and that'll help you calm your nerves. With people who are talking about nerves as well. Obviously, if you're at home, ensure there are no interruptions. If you've got pets, give them a really, really strong tranquilizer or time to the garden tree. The same may go for disruptive children. Do that. So, Helen, I'll come to in a moment. Sorry, let me finish the slides. And Kath Baxter, I won't do this on screen now because it's a bit embarrassing, but what she said is she's advised to stretch and loosen the muscles of your mouth, and that will relax the muscles and help you project your voice. I'm definitely not going to, thanks, Keith, and I'm not going to imitate it here. And please do it before the interview, not at the interview. So people will know that the researchers of communication, they kind of concluded that 55% of communication that's conveyed is through non-verbal communication, body language, facial expressions. And I kind of recall how Joe Biden talks when he wants to get a message across. He leans a little bit into the microphone and just lowers his voice a little bit. So it forces people to listen into him. So it's a really effective way of communicating. And, we've often, when we meet people the first time, we make quick judgments about their friendliness and their appearance, and without even a single word being spoken, we've already sized people up. And when we're nervous and stressed, and when I'm nervous and stressed, I talk fast, and I'm doing it now. We tend to tighten up all parts of ourselves. Muscles become tense, breathing becomes shallow, thought processes become constrained. So imagine that happening, and you're feeling nervous at interview, and that can really prevent us from performing really well at interview and our ability to connect and to exude any confidence and to think broadly. So that's why it's so important that know the subject, do your rehearsals, do your presentations, have mock interviews, learn the subject, have all the star and car model evidences ready. So you go with, I'm fully armed now. I've got all the things in my arsenal, I'm ready to go, absolutely. And of course, breathing techniques will work, but you need to do all the preparations and that will help boost the confidence. Again, ensuring you have a good body posture as well and remain attentive. People who are old will recognize many years ago, I was doing a presentation and I was waving my arms around like Magnus Pike. and I was told, I was asked what I was doing, so I said, no, I just got carried away with my lemmings there. So yeah, be careful body posture and focus on that. So I'll stop there before we move to the next slide for any questions. Hello. Okay.
Oh, there's a question. Is there a particular approach or structure to preparing a presentation on your first 100 days / 3 months in a row?
Well, so I'm talking offhand now. So with presentation, is it to say what you plan to do in the first 100 days, or what have you achieved in the first 100 days in your current role or your previous role? Because depending on what the ask is, it's different. So if it's say what you plan to deliver in the first 100 days in your new role, it's well, I'll understand what your short, medium, and long-term objectives are. Clearly, get to know the people you're going to work with, understand what the scope is, and think about, well, okay, how we can drive improvements, and always have thinking about what the benefits are you're going to realize in the role, what are going to be the smart objectives you're going to deliver, and how are you going to record and evaluate and deliver on those, and where's the evidence base for that. So I chunk up on those three bits. That's helpful.
Thanks, Zahe. No more questions. You want me to move to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Oh, I think Helen has got her hand up again.
Okay, Helen.
Yeah, just a quick one. So I've recently had an interview. I'm a contracted home worker, and I am a carer for 2 children who have additional health needs. And I just wanted to say that from the interview, I had to stop the interview halfway through because I was needed for my child to go and attend to my child, and the interviewers were really supportive, and they rescheduled the interview. And although I wasn't successful in getting the job, they did say that like the essential criteria for that role showed, because I prioritized my child and her needs, and it showed that I could prioritize and time management and everything else. So don't be afraid if you are a home worker and you need to go and attend to somebody that you care for, to kind of apologize and say that you need to leave. It was just a really positive experience, and I just think it needed calling out.
Thank you, Helen. That's really heartening to hear, and it's pleasing to know there are people out there who are sensitive to these things. I remember watching a little video of somebody who was talking about their interview experience, that they got rejected because they were in a tiny room and the kids were clambering all over them, and there's noise in the background from their pets, and they were told after the interview one of the reasons why they were not successful because of the unprofessional environment in which they conducted the interview. And that person then said, well, look, I got laid off, I lost my house, where me and my family and my pets are living in a 1-bedroom flat, and so I'm trying the best I can. And that just it broke the interviewer's heart. So what we'll do, why do we hold another interview, give you another opportunity? So it's just trying to explain. The fact that you explained would suggest that people generally, they're not evil and sadistic, but if we can explain things like, we talked about neurodiversity earlier on, and if we can explain to people become a bit more sensitive to that. So thank you for highlighting that. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks, Zahe. Do you want me to move on to the next slide? Please, can I appeal to people? Can we keep the questions relevant to the interview process? Because we have such a short time to cover a lot of things. If you miss the job application session, I can always send you the recording if you drop me an email. My email is in the chat. Thank you very much. Do I move on, Zahe?
Thank you. And thank you, Matthew. That's helpful advice as well. Thank you. Practice, practice, practice. Yes, next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay.
So we've all been through interviews. The interview panel members, clearly they'll be making notes. Again, they're documenting the answers and the evidence. Don't let that put you off. focus on the specific question being asked. Excuse me. They'll be the panel members. They'll be scoring their answers based on a scale, really. A 0 if it's no answer, 1 if it's very poor, 4 if it's very good, and 5 if it's excellent or you exceeded the expectations. Absolutely, let's be on that basis. And I spoke about this at the last session, that look, in every instance you have to aim for 5, even if you don't have the direct experience. I'll talk about it later on as well, that if you don't have the direct experience or example, you can still talk about things hypothetically. These are the steps I would take, because the questions are going to be largely scenario based or competency based. Give me an example when you did this, or what would you do in this instance. So just again, your library of achievements and your experience, you'll have enough there to work with. So the scale is going to be on that basis. So, and the question, and I've done it myself, where other people, not everybody operates the same basis, but I've given greater weighting to some of the questions than some other ones, and I've scored on that basis. Absolutely. So that's that. So, and I said, a good interviewer will really make you feel at ease. They're not there to trip you up. They'll welcome you with a smile, ask how you're feeling, and really, they should advise you that they're really impressed with the application. I want to meet you in person and learn more about you, and think you'll be a good fit based on your application. And from our side, we need to smile, maintain eye contact, and obviously we will be courteous. We'll thank them for shortlisting our application and taking the time to meet us. And I'll touch upon about that in a moment. The format of interviews is pretty much the same. You might do a presentation for 5 or 10 minutes. There'll be about 7 or 8, maybe no more than 10 questions being asked. Each panel members will ask questions, and we'll talk about, I think this is slide 6, isn't it? I think so. The next slide we won't go just yet, but the next slide will have some anticipated questions. But like I said earlier, you need to research other questions that are directly related to your respective professions as well. So, and then you'll obviously get a chance to ask questions as well. Well, in terms of, I'll get to that, Viraj, I'll get to that in a second. I'd say, listen to the question in full. In the past, I was desperate to get my answers out, and I got flustered. So, and I've got a policy now where I listen to the question in full, and after the question is asked, I just pause for a second, thinking about what Kath Baxter was saying. You pause for a second or two before you're answering, and it's amazing how the human brain works. Just in those 1 or 2 seconds, you formulate your thoughts, and it helps you answer clearly, and the question will be very specific. So we need to give very specific fact-based answers. I'll answer on that, Jane. Thinking about the car model, and so again, you can refer to all the info in the job application and elaborate, expand on those, your list of achievements and that kind of stuff. So when I said, absolutely talk about what you as an individual have achieved, whether you worked in a team, whether individually or whether it's a piece of work you're doing as a wider project, what have you achieved and what was the overall outcome? Absolutely, you have to talk about you as an individual because you're selling yourself. What I meant when I said we're talking about we is in your answers, and I've done this, I'm not sure whether this is what led to me getting a job, I'm sure it was other things as well, but I think if we use the term we in answering things like, well, okay, it kind of gives the impression that you're already part of the team. The example I'm going to give is, so instead of saying to the recruiting manager, for your project, I think you need to create a project steering group for your stakeholders, I'd flip it around and I'd say for our project, so give an indication we're already working the project, for our project, I think we need to create a project steering group for our stakeholders. Just things like that. Things like that. So, oh, thank you, Kumi, that's helpful to know. And it's amazing how they will be receptive towards that. They think this guy or this person being interviewed, they're already thinking ahead of the game. How are they going to, they're already thinking about working with us. And it gives the notion that you're already on board as a fellow team member. So that's what I meant by saying about, we talk about individually about achievements, absolutely. And as hard as it is, do not talk negatively about current roles, previous jobs. What you can do is, you may have had a poor experience with what, hopefully not everyone, but I've had poor experience in the past. What I've done is I've talked about what I've learned from that experience. It might be lack of autonomy in my role, so what did I do to overcome that? There might be too much bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff. So talk about how you overcame the challenges in your role to deliver on your obligations. I'll talk about that rather than, because it's quite, again, they are trying to suss out your personality, and if you're always negative about stuff, well, actually we don't want people with those negative vibes here, so just be mindful of that, as well, as painful as it is. And I forgot to mention earlier, but about in the application form, do talk about your things outside your work. You might have done extracurricular stuff, work in the community, all that kind of stuff. And if you've got things that are relevant, skills you've developed and experiences you've gained that are not directly done in work and outside of work, absolutely relevant. You've got those skills and experiences wherever you attain those, so definitely incorporate those into applications and indeed the interview. But do also say, like, look, do also talk about how you can make improvements in the role. You might want to collaborate with networks, universities, community of practices. I would also suggest, and I did this in the last session, mentioned in the last session, do read up on more senior roles in that field. So let's say you're applying for a Band 7 post as a project manager. I'd go back and I'd go look for a Band 8A role as a program manager and learn more about what that role offers. So then you can say, you know what, I want to start suggesting improvements here. So you're already thinking ahead of the game. So not only you're aiming for the job, you're aiming for the role for which you're applying, but you're already thinking ahead of the game. How am I going to progress myself? How am I going to progress that role and the environment which I can work in? Definitely I'd consider that. And the links at the end of the last session slides. So again, definitely do look at high banded roles and trying to use the terms and languages to impress the recruiting manager. Definitely do that. Somebody said earlier that in one of the requests, that if what should I do if I'm not sure, if I get a bit flummoxed on the answer on the question. There's no harm at all. We're not robots, and so we're human beings as our interviewers. If you're asked a question that you're not sure of the answer, just ask them if they can defer the question to a later at the end or something like that. So that will then allow you to a bit of time to think about for an appropriate answer that might be relevant. And you may come across in the conversation, oh yeah, the conversation, I can link into that as well. So definitely there's no harm in doing that. And I'd respect people for being honest as well. So in terms of the scenario-based questions, can you give me an example? I'm just using one example here. Can you give me an example when you successfully delivered a project? And I'm saying, if you've not delivered a project or managed a project, then what I would do, I would explain, what qualification or training I've undertaken in project management, and I talk about how the project has been managed in the team, but how would I manage a project? And in this environment, and we all know about understanding, having the outcomes first. What are the benefits you're going to realize? Have the end in mind first. Understanding what our financial and other resources are. We may need to establish a project steering group with all the stakeholders, include everybody in decision making, have a PID, produce a PID, agree objectives and milestones, have ownership, governance, escalations, report, do risk reporting and mitigations, and resolution of issues. So that's a bog standard. So you can talk about these things. So you may not have a direct experience in delivering a project, but you've talked about the principles, you've done the training. As it happened 13 years ago, I was recruited to lead on the procurement, development and implementation of a national performance reporting solution for HEE. I'd never managed a national project before. I've done project management training academically and other training courses I've done, but I was recruited on the basis that I knew my subject area. I was familiar with that, and with a bit of guidance, we're confident you can deliver on the project, and we did that. So don't let that put you off. As long as you can talk about all those areas, just talk as even hypothetically, you'll score points. Obviously, and then at the end of the interview, I'd thank them individually. I'll quote their names as well, and thank them for taking the time to meet you, and say, you look forward to hearing from them from the interview. And I've done this before. I finish off by saying, whatever the outcome, you wish them the best for the recruitment of the role, and being polite, kind, courteous, and these traits are much needed in our working lives and our personal lives as well. And who knows, that very last statement could clinch the deal between you and the other candidate, because this we want people with those qualities. Absolutely. So I'll pause there. We've got not too many slides to go after this. Hopefully it'll be quick. The next one will be quick. So any other questions?
There is no questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do you want to move to the next slide,
Sure.
please? So these are some, there are hundreds of them out there, but the themes are very similar. Things like, some of them are going to be direct questions, some are going to be scenario-based ones, but they cover a broad range. Things like, your understanding of the role, how you work as in a team or individually, how you communicate, your time management, how you resolve conflict, your relationship with stakeholders, your line management style, how you focus on delivering of your objectives, your project management experience, how ambitious you are, what you can offer the team and the role. And so these are some of the questions, and we'll talk about, somebody talk about NHS values. We'll talk about that towards the end, because I want to make a specific point about that. Some of you will be able to recognize these. I was going to say put them in the chat, but we've run out of time as well, so apologies for that. But and a really important point I keep reiterating, because we've got people from different professions and roles, do reach out and research roles, particularly in NHS, for your own respective areas, and look at job descriptions and person spec and that kind of stuff, and then ask yourself, well, if I was recruiting, what kind of question, what information would I want to elicit from the candidate I interview, and get yourself on the other side. And because I'll talk about, get yourselves on interview panels as well, definitely. So any questions on this slide 7?
No question. See if anybody's got their hands up. No.
Yeah.
And nothing in the Q&A as well.
Thank you. Donna, yeah, if you've, again, thinking about the STAR model, so it might be, I'll use the CAR model to keep it more concise. A challenge might be, I've had I don't know, I'm not sure everybody has this, but staff members being belligerent with somebody else. Well, okay, so that's a challenge. The next bit was, what action did you take as a line manager, and what was the result? And so it's trying to create that structure to it. So if you ever had to explain that, how do you resolve conflict? Or even things like, how do you resolve conflict between stakeholders who've got different needs? How do you get everybody on board, and that kind of stuff? So think about in your own real life work examples, how you've done that. So thank you. So do you move to the next slide, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So these are some questions that for you to ask. You can ask a whole host of other ones. The questions that, thank you for that. So the questions that here are those that I've asked people when I call up for to learn more about the role. And it's really important. One of the things, two questions are, what do you enjoy most about your job, and what do you find frustrating? And that's quite telling. A lot of it is about internal politics, and I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think anybody is. And so definitely, avail yourself to those, reach out to them, ask those questions, when you make contact with the recruiting manager. If there are any other questions, definitely do that. So you may have already considered these when you spoke to the recruiting manager, but other questions might arise during the course of the interview. So quickly make notes on those. I thought, well, I wanted to talk about these, and then reach out to them when it's your turn to ask them the questions. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, there's a question, Zaya, thank you. Somebody wants to know, they've recently been asked in NHSE about their greatest achievements. Have you got any tips on how to answer that question?
So a greatest achievement might not necessarily be one thing. It might be a culmination of things. So, and on a personal level, I think that's a poor question because it's not directly related to the role. Mine might be, look, I'm not sure I can say this to 68 people on the call, but I left school a long, long time ago with one GCSE, and I've got a master's now, and I've got a really good job. I was a late developer. I had learning issues. So my achievement would be like, look how I've, from leaving school virtually nothing to getting a master's and getting a good job at the end of it. I've also, I can say, I have always, it's probably not coming across now, but I've had issues with my confidence. And part of my learning here is delivering this presentation. It helped drive my confidence as well. So it depends. One of your greatest achievements will be raising children, and it's quite heartening and enriching for the people to do that. Others might be directly related to it, or you know what, I delivered a project within time and within budget, and this was the outcome. So it's too broad of a question. So that would have been a poor question. What I would say is things like, you know, what would you say was your most significant challenge at work, and why did you find it challenging, and what did you do to resolve it? And that's specifically that's really important. I would ask that question rather than what's your greatest achievement.
Thanks, Zahe. I've got another question in the Q&A. If the first stage of the interview is face-to-face, can you ask the interviewer why the options for online interview was not considered?
I'm not sure I can answer that. You can ask the question. I was asked to attend an interview in London, face-to-face, and do a presentation. And the reason why I declined it is because they said I had to be on site 3 days once I start the job initially, and eventually 5 days. So well, that's not going to happen. I'm 200 miles away. So it may well be that because now we're gradually moving towards 40% of the time in the office. It might well be they're trying to meet people in person, all the candidates. It's not ideal. There's no harm in having interviews remotely, and I wouldn't restrict people to come to the office to have an interview. I'd probably do it remotely. It depends on the individuals, but there's no harm in asking that.
Thanks, Zahe. Somebody just mentioned in the chat that whilst trying to ask the interviewer questions, ensure not to ask what has already been addressed by them during the interview. It shows one is not paying attention.
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks, Samuel.
Someone agree.
Someone else said, my go-to question at the moment is tell me about the culture in the team. What do you do to promote health and well-being? They said it was a good question.
Karen, do you know, all this thing about management style and the culture is really, really important because you've got poor behaviors, you've got politically motivated behaviors and personal agendas. It's not conducive to learning and growth, and it's not very helpful for people's mental health. So it's really important to ask that question, and often they get flummoxed by it. So it's definitely an important question to ask, and they might just manufacture an answer, but it's really important that people are respected and the work's been recognised, and people get an opportunity to develop and grow. Yeah, I've had interviews when I was abroad as well, and so it happens. It's good that we've got the flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Move on.
So next slide.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, Denise, I agree with you. Yeah, thank you. So what's the next? So after the interview, people will be more than familiar with this. I apologize for stating the obvious, but they're going to outline the next steps. They'll tell you when they're going to inform you. There might be other interviews taking place, but if you are offered the role, brilliant, congratulations. You need to think about, potential flexible. If you've got flexible working arrangement in your current role and you want to carry that forward, you need to just confirm that with them and any other flexible working. References will be sought, so do let your referees aware. Thank you, Sophia. Excuse me. When a written offer is received, do speak to your current line manager and inform them that you've been made an offer. You can, obviously, you may need to work your notice period, but trying to negotiate an early departure date if you want to do that. If you've got a good manager, they will support you, whether you apply for a role or whether you want to do any training. They should support you, because if they don't, you're going to leave anyway, because I don't want to work for this manager because they're not being supportive. So, of course, it can be tough, particularly if you're leaving a toxic environment and you're leaving because of the toxicity. But make sure you leave, on amicable terms. Things like writing procedure notes for the handover for your work. Make sure you leave on good terms with your colleagues. Who knows, you might end up working with them again in the future. But if you are unsuccessful, it's really important to start documenting when they call you up. Get a pen and paper ready and start documenting that, because that will help you in future interviews. That feedback. It may well be a really tough pill to swallow. Having spent countless hours filling in job applications, you may be preparing all that preparation for interviews and sitting the interview, but that will help your chances next time. What we can't do is dictate the competition we're going to face at interview. It may just happen that there was somebody else on the day who was a much closer match to the requirements and who presented themselves better on the day. And again, we spoke about it earlier, they might already have somebody earmarked for the role in the team already, who's already doing the role. But all your experience will be helpful in future applications and interviews, whether it's positive or negative experience. And you will have gathered a lot of information, a lot of knowledge to make future applications easier. So that's really important to make sure you get that feedback. So I do say to people after the interview, whether you're sitting in an exam or whatever happens, interviews, get away from the interview environment. We do this, and we all end up doing this post-mortem. Takes some quiet time. You may go over the process. You might think, well, did I perform as well as expected? Where could I have provided a stronger answer? Where do you feel where you felt you did well? What would you have done differently? Is really important. So as a learning experience, a feedback loop for yourself as well, to start documenting that way, how you can improve next time rounds. For instance, if you're asked to do a presentation and didn't come out well, okay, I need to learn the subject area, do my own presentations. And again, I've touched upon this earlier, but it's heartening to know a lot of people have been on the interview panel, but for those that haven't, you can ask your line manager as part of your personal development, why not reach out to them and say, if you can observe or participate in interview panels, even if it's with other teams, or even attend recruitment and selection training. And so you get more familiar with how things are from the other side of the table, and do trying to reach out on that basis. So Viraj, I think that's a bitter pill as well, because you did really well, but didn't quite get it. But it's really important to just get a bit more information from them. So it might well be just, as I said earlier, that somebody might have done really well, did a better presentation, and it just happens to be the luck of the draw on that day. But what that should not do is put you off. As I said right at the beginning, in the last session, I kid you not, I had to force myself to look for evidence to shortlist people. And I think, I'm talking about 30, 40 applicants, and the bulk of them are really poorly done. And so that to get into the interview, if you feel that the slide set and the YouTube video, like, you find it helpful, hopefully some of the messages in there you'll relate to, and you can resonate with, and hopefully some of the key points you'll adopt, and then that will give you that real assurance that you're going to be shortlisted, because they're going to look for evidence, and you will present the direct evidence. That's fine. So, Georgine, I'm just reading that as a member of interview. Yeah, I agree, Georgine, absolutely. They should do that, and a good interview would not make you feel uneasy in any stretch, because the more they make you feel at ease, the more they'll get out of you as well. So Thank you. So I'm going to stop there for this slide. Any other questions?
No other question. I don't know if anybody is, let's see, in the Q&A. No. And no hands are raised, so that's fine.
So just some points from James and George. Yeah, James, that's a bit, well, that's a bit, yeah, that's a bit an eye-opener for me. They should have said right at the outset, were they just nodding and smiling? It's a bit surprising that they said that at the feedback rather than at the interview itself. Georgina, agree. Cultural influences. Yeah, people need to be a bit more sensitive about differences, and this is about a diversity and inclusivity, and accepting people for who they are, and being aware of different needs. So there needs to be some sensitivity around that. Absolutely. Move to the next slide, please.
Sure.
So this, I think, yes, I think it's the last slide. We go cooking on gas now. So the bit on the left-hand side are the 3 themes that colleagues on the call have asked for feedback, suggested for additional conversations on that. So I think I've covered a lot of things on there that are on there, but what I wanted to touch upon a few things. So in terms of the first one, improving delivery of competency-based answers. So they may well be things like, can you give an example when you manage competing deadlines on short notice? So that tells about how your time management and your ability to respond under pressure and that kind of stuff. So you might negotiate deadline, and again, think of a specific example, because I'm sure you'll have competing deadlines or competing imperatives. It will have happened. So what did you do using the card and star model? You might say, well, I negotiated the deadline. I might have provided summary information to people in the short term. You might say, I know what, we'll have a clear file and folder structure where we keep our files and reports and analyses and documentation, so we can just dip into those and get that information, share it. You may seek support from your colleagues. You might reprioritize your own work. You might work flexibly. You might need signing off by the manager. Keep the recipients of the information updated. And obviously all this, think about what the outcome is, but definitely if you use a star car model, you'll have all the answers there. Another one might be, okay, what I would say is, as I said before, start recording your achievements now in your personal files. You'll have lots of examples to use in the application and lots to use in the interview. And there's no harm in using similar examples, as long as, depending on what the question is, you need to accentuate or highlight different things of it. So think about in terms of achievements, what you've been particularly proud of. You might have delivered a project within budget. You might have got an award or recognition for a piece of work. You might have automated processes, things like using Excel Visual Basic. That would save time and cost. It would increase speed and accuracy and quality. And if you've touched upon those, and this is what I say to people in my last session, give a few little golden nuggets in the application. Say, you know what I did? I reduced reporting time from 3 days down to 2 hours by automating Excel process. Oh, wow, this person, he said 3 days down to 2 hours. And what I then did, I assumed more responsibility that's more investigative and analytical. So what I also did, I put that code in my colleagues' computers as well. So that will help save time and improve accuracy for them as well. And that is monumental. For us, it might be nothing because it's part of regular work, but for other people, it could be magical. And they're looking for people like that. So you give those few little golden nuggets, and it's amazing how they're hooked into that. So definitely, and in terms of when you're talking, we talk about post-it notes and notes in desk. I'm not saying write detailed paragraph, just a quick bullet point. You might say, right, Excel VBA, 3 days down to 2 hours. And then talk about it, because we're talking now. We talk in our meetings. We talk, on other Teams calls. It's having a conversation, and we're trying to make it as natural as possible. Definitely. So that's a bit around, your competency-based answers. There'll be broad themes, but if you've got the card and star model for all the different areas, you'll have examples there you can just dip into the conversation, and you will not get confused or flummoxed if you've gone through them and said, right, I know what I need to say about this. Have quick bullet points and say, all right, I've been through it so many times, it's coming to my second nature. So what we shouldn't do is fill in the application and just don't look at that. I would carry on even reviewing the application before you even get shortlisted for an interview, in anticipation of having a short 1 week notice period for the interview, so you're already ahead of the game. I was given 1 day notice to do a presentation because there was a weekend in between. So anyway, in terms of the STAR method, I think I've touched upon that, but I was saying that, look, do start documenting all those. You'll have enough examples in your library. You can use the same, scenario if we were talking about that, instead of avoiding repetition. So, for instance, if you're asked, you may be asked, what communication skills you applied in delivering a project, and you may emphasize, well, I involved stakeholders and facilitated joint decision-making opportunities. I rotated asked for the chairpersonship to be rotated, ensured all voices were heard, and this led to the adoption of the proposals. And later on, you might be asked about how you applied analytical and judgmental skills in aiding the delivery of a project. And you can say, you know what, I can talk about the same project. You can still do that, but think about where your analytical and judgmental skills were explored. It may well be your scrutiny of, third-party software suppliers. You may have conducted thorough due diligence of them. You may have stipulated conditions into the contracts to ensure they honoured their side of the agreements. You may have reviewed progress regularly with them and requested post-completion evaluations, and to understand whether the scope of the project was delivered. And you're talking about the same project, but you look at it from a different lens. So there's no harm in using the same example, but as long as you answer the question that they want you to answer. So I wouldn't write verbatim everything. Again, like short bullet points, and a lot of it is rehearsing and practicing and rehearsing. Much in the same way I've done this. We've got slides. I've got a few notes here I'm touching upon, and I'm talking about those. It's all about practice. The next bit, effective interview panel interview strategies. As I said right at the beginning, interviews, they're not designed to be unfair. They're not designed to trip people up. And if they are, that's a red flag for me. But if you prepare thoroughly, as early as possible, even when you're doing the application, you think you write your application, you know what, I'm going to get an interview here, and what is it I need to do to get an interview and get the job? So put all those golden nuggets in there and all the evidence, and write about all your passion and determination, patient care, your values, behaviors, that kind of stuff, your integrity. Feed that in as well, because there'll be a bit on values and behaviors in the person spec, no doubt. But definitely do your research on the team and the organization, read up on the role. The job advert is going to be quite a clear example of what the demands of the role are, probably more than the job description itself. So, and then, you can learn more about the team and all that when you have the conversation with the recruiting manager, and you'll have to recall a lot of these at interview. So, I said, if you've received, I've touched upon it earlier, an unexpected question, you can always ask, can I answer it later? And if you can't, and you've got a theoretical answer to it, definitely answer it. What wouldn't do is just say, well, I don't know what to say. You won't score it. But even if you give a theoretical, hypothetical answer, that will still score you points. And things like, well, people get a little bit lost if they start talking, they're talking about NHS values. And, if I ask people, I won't do it now because we're running out of time, but if I ask people to put in the chat, what they think NHS values are, 80 to 90% of the answers are going to be the same. Things about respect and dignity, quality of care, having patients at the forefront of decisions, being compassionate, ensuring everybody's included, and that kind of stuff. They're not here to, ask you to repeat parrot fashion on what's there. They want to know, well, are your values aligned with NHS values, and where's the evidence? And thinking about the CAR model. So those are 3 themes. Thankfully, hopefully, I've answered all those in the session and here. So what we've done in the 10 slides or so, we're doing a quick recap of the job application process. We've talked about how to prepare for the interview, and the most important thing is the preparation, not the interview itself. It's the preparation needed for the application and the interview. There's lots we can do before the interview, such as listing our achievements to talk about. Even before we shortlisted our interview, we can anticipate some of the questions and prepare model answers. And during the interview, we spoke about body language, pausing before answering, projecting our voice, using the STAR model for scenario-based questions and evidence. And this thing earlier about, well, what's your greatest achievement? I'm not a big fan of those. And even though other ones are what your strengths and weaknesses are, well, actually, you should know that from my job application. I was asked that in an interview, so I was talking about my strengths, but what my development needs. Well, I wish I was a statistician, because I felt real value and I can apply those skills in this role. And the interview said, I wish I was a statistician as well, but we reach out to economists in our organization for that piece of work. But that's not very helpful. I don't really like those kind of questions. And after the interview, we spoke about the process and next steps, whether it was successful or unsuccessful. So I'm going to stop a few minutes just for any other Q&As that we didn't, and I apologize, I didn't read all the messages on the chats, but any Q&As now for the next few minutes, and I'll talk about the links before we log off.
Zahir, just to
that?
say that I have a question, but it regards the previous slides. Should I wait till later?
No, we can. Shall we stay on the line after the session, and then we can
Is that
talk?
Emil?
It is, yes.
Oh, hi, Emil. Yeah, if you can stay on the lines, I will have a one-to-one with you. That's fine.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
We can have a 10-to-1, whoever wants to stay on. Don't have to be 1-to-1, but we can have however many people want to stay on. But thank you. That's fine. Any other questions?
No questions, Thank you.
Okay, so with regard, if you don't want to go to the next slide, the last slide.
Yeah, sure.
So there's the next slide, slide 11. It's got these are hyperlinks to the various, there's some YouTube videos and reading material there. As I said before, the breathing exercises. I think if I had time, I'd probably slow my tempo down a bit. I'd probably done a bit of breathing, but I was hyperventilating before trying to get in 20 minutes into the call. But again, there's lots around how you can exude confidence in interviews. Kath Baxter, who's a voice coach, so some lot of short videos there on YouTube. Definitely do avail yourself to those. There's some scenario-based questions. Again, they're generic, so we need to think about what's specific to you guys individually. And the last one, Me and My Brand, that's an NHS. So Me and My Brand is about your unique identity, your unique selling point. What have you got to offer, compared to other candidates?